Welcome to That's Inclusive, where we talk about disability and what it means to live a full life engaging in our communities. What does that look like, and how can we work together to make our world a more inclusive place?
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That's Inclusive. I'm here today with a good friend and a fellow member of the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities, Seana Hallberg. I'm saying your last name correctly.
Correct, it is.
And she just joined the council recently, but as we've had multiple conversations, we found that we have a lot in common, a lot of things to discuss. So in a new series on That's Inclusive, Seana and I thought that maybe you guys would like to hear some of our conversations and participate. At least if we'll have fun. So we hope that you guys will have fun with it too. So Seana, welcome. Can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Thank you, Pat. So my name is Seana Hallberg. I am a newer member to the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities. I live in the Seacoast, New Hampshire. I have a neurodivergent spouse, and I have 3 children, 3 teenage children. And my eldest and my youngest are both disabled. They're both multiply disabled. And I have a history of a mental health background, and I actually have a new diagnosis of being neurodivergent myself. So we are a very neurodiverse household.
Well, that's great, Seana. Thank you for sharing that with us. We thought today, we're recording this January 2nd, the day after New Year's. You won't be hearing this until February, but we thought we'd talk a little bit about our experience at the holidays. Since Sean and I both prefer to discuss what's on our mind, what recently happened, and we find that a much easier thing to process. We're going to talk a little bit today about what's celebrating the holidays, whatever holiday it is you choose to celebrate. It's like when you're doing it with a disability, or you have a child with a disability, and how celebrating holidays may look different for us than it does for a quote unquote typical family, whatever that is. So Seana, can you share some thoughts? Do you celebrate? What do you celebrate? How do you approach the holidays differently from maybe societal expectations of how one approaches the holiday season?
Yep, thank you. So first of all, I want to say that my first inclination is to say I'm so glad the holidays are over. And when I say that, sometimes I think for certain people it gives them pause, because I do think that there is a certain expectation around the holidays that they will be really joyous and filled with community and family and events that we might look forward to like year-round, having traditions that a lot of families participate in. And I know for our family, my husband and I both, we didn't grow up religious per se, but we celebrate, we do celebrate Christmas, but it's more of a consumer-based Christmas, I think. I hate to say that, but it's not rooted in a lot of tradition. It's more like the way that we were raised, that you get gifts and there is Santa. My kids are much older now, so that's not the case. But I think what I wanted to share today is the way that more invisible and hidden disabilities can play out around the holidays and the expectations that other people have for our families and how we will show up. Um, a long time ago, after my kids were diagnosed, so my kids are autistic, two of them are, and my children, we had to fight for a diagnosis, which is a whole different story. But my son was later diagnosed almost 14, and my daughter was 12 when diagnosed. But I knew for years we couldn't. Going to pancake breakfasts and sitting on Santa's lap never happened for us because there was so much sensory overwhelm. We couldn't eat the foods that were provided. Going and sitting with somebody dressed in a costume was absolutely terrifying for them. And I think, the other thing that I want to touch on too, and the only reason I want to say it right now is that I often forget if I don't say it right when I'm thinking it, is that I think comparison when you're living this life, it's really hard to not compare, especially with the advent of social media. A lot of the things that other people go and do, we can't because we don't end up feeling successful. We end up competing sensory needs within the family. Loud environments can be hard. The food that's provided can be really hard. And I think that a lot of times with more hidden disabilities, I know for myself, I got a lot of pushback from family that it was something that I was doing, that I was permissive, or that I wasn't strict enough, or that and how it shook out was that I was modifying my parental strategies around what my kids needed. Mm-hmm. And that was not common. That was not common to see you not have, sitting at meals is something that's really hard for my family. It's gotten better as they've aged. But if you can't sit for a holiday meal or you can't eat what's provided, you can only eat the rolls. People have a lot of feelings about that. Mm-hmm. People have a lot of feelings about what your children eat. People have a lot of feelings about your children not opening gifts in front of them. A lot of children, gift giving is extremely overwhelming because there's a lot of eyes on you and there's a lot of expectations how you'll respond, right? And so I think that what I've realized in the last couple of years is that I don't plan anything. Our holidays are just us. And in a lot of ways, it's lonely. When I said this morning before we started recording, the impact of isolation and the lack of community at this time of year can be, I think, the hardest. And I think it's the hardest when I see all of the images about what people have done and accomplished and seen and all the togetherness and all that. And of course there's sides we don't see, right? There's meltdowns we don't see and there's all of that. But like, even for us to go and have like a simple meal out can be like the only thing we can do in a day because it's so exhausting. And we have had to pull it all together, kind of like it's like an Olympic event. So I think I'll stop. I hope that was enough information.
Yeah, that's really good insight into everything that goes on trying to effectively meet the needs of your children and meet your own needs at a time of year when society and the people around us have these expectations of what the perfect holiday looks like. and what kids should or shouldn't be doing. As a parent, and this is not a holiday related story, but as a parent with a disability, I had similar things happen. Right, there was a lot of expectations that you should helicopter parent your children, right? My daughter was 5 years old and running all over the neighborhood without me, having fun and going to see neighbors. And I had parents who would say, "How could you? This is dangerous. How could you do this?" And I'm like, "Well, it's for me. It's a choice. I either let her be her and be her social butterfly self without me because I don't have the physical capacity to follow her all over the neighborhood, or I try to hem that in and keep her physically in the house with me, which feels almost abusive to me when her nature is to be out there and be in all these different situations. I give her the tools to be safe, right? I give her the tools to understand not to go with certain people, to what to do if someone tries to approach you, what to do. She got a cell phone at a very early age, which again, a lot of parents were like, "You're giving her a cell phone early." I'm like, again, I can't follow her around. There's no way for me to keep track of her. So I understand. I understand your when other people are suggesting that what your kids are doing is not acceptable, like not opening gifts in front of other people. It's like, I get it. When I give a gift, it's nice to see how people react. But come on, you know, there's an option. You can always open it on your own and then text, "Hey, thanks, I loved it." Yeah, you know. So for me, I grew up very religious. My father was a minister, but we were sort of the opposite of you. So he had a problem with the secularization of Christmas. So other people who grew up in evangelical homes will know this whole issue around it's too secular, it should keep Christ in Christmas and all the rest of that. He was sort of one of those. So every year, we had the same conversation, and I think he got to that he'd do it just because he knew that it would get me going. He would go, "I don't think we're gonna do Christmas tree this year." And every year we go, "No, we have to do a Christmas tree. What, are you kidding me?" And every year we would end up doing a Christmas tree. And so in a way, it was my parents' tendency not to do the traditional Christmas thing that when I had my daughter, I turned into like the Christmas fairy. Right? We did all the things. We baked the cookies, we made the crafts. The house looked like Santa Claus had sneezed all over it. I mean, it was insane. But then aging with a disability, those things got so much harder. It got so much harder to do all the things. And I eventually had to sort of put those things away. We used to have like 25 people at the house at the Christmas. It was crazy. And now I look back now when it's just the two or four of us, depending on who's there, And they're like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. What was I thinking? Like 25 people in my house. It just, it honestly was not that enjoyable. I don't think I know Jim hated it.
Mm.
But I did a lot of things because those were the things you do. That's what you do. You invite people over. You have a big meal. You have a Christmas tree. You decorate. You make cookies. You do all these things. And when I was younger and I didn't do them, I always felt like I was missing out. But then after I did them, I realized, oh, actually, and wasn't missing out. There's not that much. This isn't that great. And so I think the holidays, the holidays, like you said, what you said, oh, thank God they're over. And actually, my physical therapist said that to me yesterday when I saw her. She's like, not yesterday, Tuesday. Um, she's like, the holidays are over. Aren't you thrilled? And I was like, yay, kind of. I'm kind of glad. But then so many people feel that way. Right? So many people, honestly, when you talk to them and you say, are you glad the holidays are over? Almost everyone I talk to says, honestly, yeah. And so I think when people say to you, I don't understand why you're happy that the holidays are over. I wonder if they're being honest with themselves.
Mhm.
Right. Because I think most people, when they're honest with themselves, say, yeah, I don't enjoy this.
Yeah.
Actually, this is too much. Actually, the only reason why I'm pretending to enjoy this is because society told me I should be enjoying this. But because Mariah Carey is singing her little song on the radio. So I have to be in that space with her because otherwise people are gonna look at me funny.
I have so many things that came up for me as you were talking. I am going to try to remember them. Of course, I didn't bring a piece of paper because that would mean that I would have, the forethought to do that. But so,
I'm with you.
okay. So the first thing that comes up for me is the difference between a parent caregiver who has mobility challenges and then the idea of helicopter. You are not doing enough to oversee your child who is, physically able to navigate their space, is a child who learns through exploration and moving their body. And so you're oriented to the world completely differently from your daughter. And the expectation is that you are not parenting her in the way that society deems appropriate because you cannot navigate physically in the way she can. So I hear you saying that. And as you're saying it, I'm thinking, oh my God, because my experience is the opposite. So my children, another example of the way that the hidden versus more visible disability, sometimes there's so much overlap and sometimes they're just completely different experiences. When my children were little, I did not know why they could not sit and eat. Now I understand that they learn and they process information and they keep their bodies regulated by moving their bodies, which has been a huge hurdle at school, as we know, right? Because we need to sit. And so when they were little, and I had 3 of them, I would move around with spoons and feed them as they moved. And I just did it. Like I acclimated to what their needs were. And I didn't really give myself flack. I kind of just thought that's what everyone did because that was my experience. And I had a family member suggest that maybe they could not sit at the table because I was such a helicopter parent. And so when I heard you say that, I was like, well, I couldn't win on the opposite side because I was doing what their body needed to do in order to eat. I mean, in order to eat, if I forced them to sit, they would not have eaten, right? It would have been a huge way to have like a huge meltdown. They would have been adverse to the food. So that was the first thing that came up when you were talking that I was like, oh my gosh, so different. The next thing I was thinking, I think, is it had to do with caregiver burnout, and the holidays specifically, regardless of what you celebrate. I heard I heard you talking about having like a bunch of people and that paring down and that the expectations, I'm trying to remember back, and how you eventually like let those expectations go. And as you're aging, how that, it really impacts our ability as caregivers. That's what kind of came up for me too, as that as I am an aging parent, I'm very young, but now I have developed chronic health conditions. My mental health has really been impacted from a lot of the trauma we've experienced and the fact that I've had to advocate so much. And again, when we talk about lack of community and lack of understanding, and even within our family systems, the lack of understanding of our experiences, my health has taken a huge hit. And so what I noticed this holiday was I didn't have any stamina to do anything. I, as the matriarch in a very patriarchal society, it's kind of been my role. And that is not to negate my partner at all, but there's a whole host of reasons that I take on a lot of executive functioning within our household. Um, I I felt the holidays impact me really greatly in terms of my mental health and my physical health because of the expectations of the gift giving and going out and purchasing things and wrapping things and making sure certain family members had the things. And oh, I have to food shop because you need to prepare a meal. And I often in our family prepare multiple meals because my family cannot eat the same things. And so there's always the thought of, okay, well, I can't just make one traditional meal. I have to often do multiple meals for our family. And so that stuck out to me. I'm trying to think of the other, I guess that's good for now. I think that's good for now, but I had more thoughts, but I can't remember them at the moment.
Right. It did. I thought as a kid that I would, I guess part of it is that life left me out, right? As a kid, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. While most kids with disabilities and unfortunately, it's still happening. But most kids with disabilities were in segregated classrooms. Um, my father's attitude had always been, your disability is so minor. It's almost as if he even he even didn't recognize me as having a disability. This minor difference that didn't stop me from doing everything everybody else does. So, but in a way it did, right? I was in typical classrooms around. I never knew anybody else with a disability growing up. And so I was always just a weird kid. So any sort of little connection that I could make to typical American to being a normal American kid. I wanted, with everything I had, to make that connection. So if other kids had Christmas trees, I had to have a Christmas tree. If other kids were getting this roller skates for Christmas, I had to get roller skates for Christmas. And that was a disaster. That ended up being. But so I thought that being the closer I could get to whatever the normal is, the better off I'd be. And as an adult with this disability, I realized that most of the people over there in the normal, they are miserable. They are miserable. And actually, spending time outside of the normal was actually beneficial, right? I grew up in a much more in a much calmer, in a much more mentally healthy environment because my father primarily decided, we don't have to do all the Christmas stuff. We're fine outside the normal. You don't have to be. You're fine outside. We're all fine here now. I mean, there were certain things in which, there were certain ways to walk and talk, and I did a lot of therapy growing up, which now, now I'm undoing some of that therapy in other therapy, what the effect of physical and occupational therapy had on my mental well-being as a kid. But I think I think the holidays, I understand that sometimes when it's just the five of you, it must feel kind of lonely when you see the pictures of the big group, especially if there's someone who had been a part of your traditions who no longer can be because it puts you in a really unhealthy space. And what do we do with that? And part of the reason why we want the holidays to be over is because we want to go back to the space where they were typically not a part of our space. And so we don't have to think about the fact that they're missing again.
Yeah. I wanted to, again, when you were disclosing about trying to appear as typical as you could and having the items that your peers had, etc. What I kept thinking about is actually what I kept thinking about is kind of that role for my non-disabled child and the impact that like experiences like the holidays, the experience my non-disabled child has around the holidays, and just what it is like growing up as the only non-disabled child in a home, because the majority in our home are disabled and the majority of individuals in my home are autistic. And so, I there's a lot of things that this brings up, but my non-disabled child misses out on a lot of things because as a family those things are too hard for us to navigate. And so there's always a sense that of guilt, I think, on my part, that I can't give him the experiences that I feel like I want to, because the number of family members in our house outweighs,
Mhm.
the the disabled family members in our house outweighs the number of non-disabled. And so it made me think of that. It made me think of, there's, for me, my non-disabled son is a senior. He's going to be going away to school next year. And something that's also been coming up for me when I think about the holidays too is this is possibly like our last holiday where he's like home with us. He's going to come home, he's going to come home from school. That's not lost on me. But for the first time in years, we haven't been in crisis. The first time we came out of crisis was like maybe 6 months ago. And so things are, for the first time, I'm able to take a breath. And my son is going to graduate in spring. And I've missed out. I've missed out on a lot of his childhood advocating for his siblings. And by proxy, he's had to be very independent. And people will say, oh, that's great. That's wonderful. He's going to be resilient. It's not lost on me that he has a lot of big feelings around me, around the attention I've given him, around the things that he's missed out on, around, we're looking at college for him, and we're looking at college for his brother who's disabled, who's a bit older than him. Financially, his brother is going to need far more support. The institutions that my eldest son can go to are not the same institutions that my middle son is looking at. And so, as always, the financial challenges of meeting my disabled children's needs are much more cumbersome than my non-disabled son. And so once again, I'm kind of looking at, how do I tell one kid, this is the amount of money I'm going to spend? And the other kid, well, because we need to do this for your brother, there's no other institutions that can support him. And it's so expensive, and there's such a privilege, which also, this is a whole other conversation, because that's such a privilege to be even able to think about sending a son or anyone to a post-secondary learning opportunity that's so financially burdensome. It's once again, like, I feel like I'm taking things away from my non-disabled son because I have to do these things for my other disabled children to have somewhat of an equal playing field to my non-disabled child. It's still never going to be equal, but how do you explain that to a 17-year-old? I mean, how do you make sense of any of these things as a 17-year-old? So I know I'm digressing from the holidays, but again, these things come up for me in the holidays. Yeah.
I think maybe we should think about talking about that. Like, how do, and we'll put this aside, maybe the topic, how do people who don't experience disabilities in a family within the minority? So that was true of my daughter. Like, she was the minority in our family, even to some extent in our extended family. How did that affect them? And she had a whole different perspective now that she's, Lord help me, 28. And just a lot of the things that we've talked about recently has really surprised me about how she remembers things. And so I think that may be a topic for us to discuss on a future podcast. How do we, as parents of kids with disabilities and parents who experience our own limitations, what is it like? How do we interact with our kids who don't experience those limitations? And because I feel like this has been a great talk, and that we've talked, you and I, so many times. We could go on for like another. We could put Joe Rogan to shame and make like a 3 hour and make like a 3 hour podcast. But I think we're gonna draw it to a close for now. But Sean and I are going to be talking together regularly and inviting you all into our conversation. So I hope that you enjoyed our inaugural patent. I don't know if we're going to come up with a name for it or not, but for now I'll call it a Patent Channel Talk uh, podcast. And yeah, we will do this again. So thank you, Seana, for joining me. Thank you for giving of your time like this, and I look forward to our next conversation.
You, Pat. Thank you for having me. And as always, thank you for sharing part of your life and your story with me. And I just really appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Vanessa Blaze, and this was a production of the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities, produced by Isadora Rodriguez-Legendre and Vanessa Blaze, with many thanks to Josh Hardy and the rest of the crew here at Concord TV. We love to have guests with differing perspectives. These views are personal and do not necessarily represent those of the DD Council.